The elite gathered for an evening of luxury and charity, never imagining the event would end marked by an act of brutality. Before a shocked audience, a tycoon beats his pregnant wife over an insignificant detail. What he didn't know was that she was the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the country, and that would change everything. What began as violence turned into a public war for justice, revealing secrets that would destroy empires. The ballroom of the Savoy Hotel had never sparkled as brightly as it did that Saturday night. The bohemian crystal chandeliers reflected golden light onto the long gowns and impeccable tuxedos of London's most distinguished guests. Marina Ashton adjusted the light blue dress that delicately embraced her 7-month pregnant belly. Her swollen feet protested inside her high heels, but she maintained the polite smile she had learned to display during her 3 years of marriage to Richard Thorne. Richard circulated through the ballroom like someone commanding an invisible army. His gestures were precise, his voice firm as he greeted businessmen and politicians. At 42, the billionaire investor had built an empire of investment funds that moved millions daily. His reputation was immaculate, at least in the eyes of the world. Marina knew another version of that man, the version that emerged when the doors closed and the masks fell. The charity gala had been organized to raise funds for a children's hospital. Marina had always supported social causes, even before meeting Richard. It was one of the few things that still made her feel alive, useful. The string quartet played Vivaldi, while waiters circulated with trays of canapés and glasses of champagne. She only drank sparkling water, protecting the small life growing inside her. Her father, Henry Ashton, observed everything from a distance. The communications entrepreneur had built a television and internet conglomerate that reached across the entire country. He was a man of quiet power who preferred the backstage to the spotlight. When Marina married Richard, Henry had kept his reservations. There was something in the gleam of his son-in-law's eyes that bothered him, a coldness hidden beneath the superficial charm. But Marina seemed happy at the beginning, and he respected his daughter's choice. Marina felt the tension grow as the night progressed. Richard had drunk more than usual, and she recognized the signs: the clenched jaw, the more intense gaze, the way he held his glass with excessive force. She tried to keep her distance, chatting with other guests about decor and travel, safe topics that wouldn't provoke any reaction from him. It was when the main course was served that everything collapsed. Marina held a glass of grape juice, red like wine, while listening to Beatrice Finch talk about her latest Mediterranean cruise. Unconsciously, as she gestured, the glass tilted, and a few drops fell onto the sleeve of Richard's white tuxedo. The dark red liquid stained the immaculate fabric like a prophecy. The silence was instantaneous. Richard looked at his sleeve, then at Marina. His eyes darkened in a way she knew well, but had never seen in public. He slowly stood up, and Marina felt her heart race. She tried to apologize, her voice trembling, but he didn't seem to hear her. Or rather, he seemed to hear only his own escalating fury. The decorative whip hung on the wall as part of the ballroom's ornamentation, an antique piece reminiscent of the Victorian era. Richard tore it down with a brusque movement, and what happened next seemed to occur in slow motion for everyone present. Marina tried to retreat, instinctively protecting her belly, but he advanced. The first blow cut through the air with a sharp sound. She screamed, more from shock than pain in that first moment. The guests were paralyzed. Men and women accustomed to dealing with corporate crises and complex negotiations simply froze before that explicit violence. Marina fell to her knees, her arms still wrapped around her abdomen, trying to protect herself. Richard continued, blind with rage and alcohol, each blow echoing through the silent ballroom. The light blue dress began to turn red. It was the quartet's conductor who finally reacted. He dropped his violin and ran to grab Richard's arm, along with 2 security guards, who finally awoke from the collective trance. Other men joined them, immobilizing the aggressor who still bellowed incomprehensible accusations. Marina lay on the cold marble floor, breathing with difficulty, feeling sharp pains pierce her body. The women then approached, forming a protective circle around her. Someone had already called an ambulance. Beatrice Finch pressed a linen napkin against one of the wounds on Marina's arm, trying to stem the bleeding. The pregnant woman kept her eyes closed, whispering inaudible prayers, feeling the baby move inside her as if it too were frightened. Richard was led to another room, still yelling, blaming Marina for the public humiliation, for the stain on his tuxedo, for existing. His voice echoed through the hotel corridors while she remained on the floor of that ballroom that should have been a charity celebration. Henry Ashton arrived 20 minutes later. He had left the event early to deal with a company emergency, but received a frantic call from his assistant still in the car. When he entered the ballroom and saw Marina being placed on a stretcher by paramedics, his normally controlled face transformed. He approached his daughter, gently held her hand, and whispered something in her ear. She nodded slightly, her eyes still closed from pain. As the ambulance departed with sirens cutting through the London night, Henry stood at the hotel entrance. His eyes swept across the ballroom, observing every embarrassed face, every witness to that barbarity. Then he picked up the phone and made the first of many calls he would make that night. His voice was calm, methodically calm, when he told the caller that he needed all the videos from that event, from every possible angle. The war had begun, though no one but him knew it yet. Richard Thorne had just made the most expensive mistake of his life by touching Henry Ashton's daughter. And the businessman was known for two things in the business world: strategic patience and an unforgiving memory. That night, under the crystal chandeliers of the Savoy Hotel, the fate of many lives had changed forever. St. Thomas's Hospital was on high alert when Marina arrived. Doctors had already been informed of the seriousness of the situation, and a complete obstetric team awaited in the emergency room. Henry arrived a few minutes later, running through the white corridors with an urgency his employees had never seen. He was always the controlled man, but that night the mask cracked. Marina was immediately taken for examinations. Doctors needed to assess not only the external injuries, but, more importantly, to check if the baby had suffered any trauma. The following hours were a blur of machines, worried voices, and constant pain. Henry remained in the waiting room, refusing coffee, water, anything but news about his daughter and grandson. When Dr. Augustus Miller finally emerged from the procedure room, his tired face carried an expression of cautious relief. Marina was stable. The injuries were serious, especially on her back and arms, but no vital organs had been hit. And the baby, by miracle or destiny, remained strong. The heartbeats remained regular. There were no signs of fetal distress. Henry closed his eyes and took a deep breath for the first time in hours. While Marina slept under the effect of mild sedatives, Henry began his silent campaign. He called Jonathan Reed, his legal director for over 15 years. He needed everything about Richard Thorne, every document, every financial movement, every contract. Jonathan was discreet and efficient, characteristics that had kept him close to Henry for so long. He immediately understood the gravity of the situation and put his entire team to work that dawn. The sun rose over London, revealing a city that still didn't fully know what had happened the night before. But social media was already buzzing. Some guests had discreetly recorded videos during the event, not of the assault itself, as everyone was too paralyzed to think of recording those terrible first moments, but of the moments afterward, when Richard was restrained and Marina was attended to. The images began to circulate in private groups, then leaked to public profiles. Richard woke up in his penthouse in Kensington with a brutal hangover and fragmented memories of the night before. When he picked up his phone and saw the notifications, reality hit him like a punch. There were dozens of messages from his lawyer, partners, and press advisors. He tried to call Marina, but the number was out of reach. He tried his father-in-law, but Henry didn't answer his calls, only sent a short direct message that simply said, "Wait." In the newsrooms of the country's leading newspapers, editors received anonymous calls offering exclusive material about the scandal. Henry knew every director, every editor-in-chief of the main publications. He didn't need to pressure anyone. The story was too strong. It had all the elements that investigative journalism loved: power, violence, betrayal of public image. By noon, Richard Thorne's name was in every news report. Marina woke up in the hospital with a sore body and a confused mind. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was and why. Her first, Reaction was to bring her hands to her belly, trying to feel the baby's movement. When she felt a soft kick, tears came. Tears of relief, of pain, of anger, of shame. A nurse quickly entered, called by the monitor that registered her accelerated heart rate. Henry entered shortly after. Father and daughter looked at each other in silence for a long moment. There was so much to say, so many unasked questions during years of apparent normality. Marina was the one who broke the silence, her voice hoarse, asking about the baby. Henry held her hand and assured her that the little one was fine, that she was strong like her mother. Then she asked about Richard, and Henry simply said that he couldn't get close, that he was taking care of it. What Marina didn't know was that, while they were talking, Jonathan Reed was in a meeting with public prosecutors. The videos of the event had been enough to initiate a formal inquiry, but Henry wanted more. He wanted to destroy not only Richard's freedom, but the entire structure of lies upon which he had built his reputation, and for that he needed proof that this had not been the first time. It was then that Connie appeared. Connie Smith, 53, had worked as a housekeeper in Richard and Marina's home for 2 years until she was dismissed 6 months ago for reasons that were never clear. She saw the news, and something inside her broke. Throughout her time working in that house, she had witnessed scenes that gave her nightmares. Marina always had bruises, always had excuses, stairs, doors, silly domestic accidents. Connie had never believed it, but she was just an employee. What power would her word have? But Connie was smarter than she seemed. Months before she was fired, when the assaults became more frequent and violent, she installed a small security camera in her own room. It was for her protection, in case she was accused of theft or any problem. The maid's room was near the main staircase, and the corridor was the frequent stage for Richard's outbursts. Unintentionally, she had documented months of abuse. Connie sought Henry through a mutual acquaintance. She brought a USB drive with over 15 videos. Some showed Richard pushing Marina against walls, others captured screams, objects being thrown, threats. In one of them, particularly disturbing, Marina was 3 months pregnant, and Richard held her arm with such force that it was possible to see his fingers sinking into her skin. Henry watched everything in his office, alone. Each video was a stab. How had he not noticed? How had he allowed his daughter to live like this? Guilt consumed him, but he channeled it into something more productive, an iron determination to ensure that Richard paid for every second of that suffering. Meanwhile, in the business world, Richard's reputation began to crumble. Investors requested urgent meetings. Some began to question the integrity of his funds. After all, if a man was capable of assaulting his own pregnant wife in public, what other ethical violations might he be committing in his business? And then Julia appeared. Julia Ferris, 31, a model and businesswoman. She had been Richard's mistress for almost 2 years. It wasn't a situation she was proud of, but Richard had promised to leave Marina, saying the marriage was just for show, that he needed to maintain his image. Julia had believed him, or wanted to believe him. But when she saw the images of the assault, when she saw Marina on the floor protecting the baby, something inside her changed. Julia contacted Henry's lawyer with information that would completely change the course of the investigations. Richard was not just a domestic abuser. He had been using Marina's forged signatures on financial documents for over a year. He had transferred millions of pounds to offshore accounts in her name without her knowledge. Julia had copies of some of these documents, as Richard had once left them in her apartment. Jonathan Reed could barely believe it when he saw the material. This transformed a case of assault into something much bigger: financial fraud, document forgery, possible money laundering. He immediately contacted the National Crime Agency, NCA. The case now had dimensions that exceeded the regional sphere. Marina was discharged from the hospital 5 days later. Her body still ached, the marks were still visible under her clothes, but the baby remained healthy. Henry took her to his home in Hampstead, a mansion protected by discreet but efficient security guards. She would not return to the penthouse she had shared with Richard. That chapter was closed. In the first few days, Marina barely spoke. She spent hours looking out the window, a hand on her belly, processing. everything that had happened. Henry respected her silence, but made sure she knew she wasn't alone. He brought in a psychologist specializing in trauma, a gentlewoman named Dr. Clara Hayes, who visited Marina daily. It was during one of these sessions that Marina finally broke down. She told everything from the beginning. How Richard had changed after the wedding, how the first assault had happened during an argument about her wanting to continue working on social projects, how he had gradually isolated her from friends, controlling her outings, monitoring her calls, how she had felt trapped, ashamed, guilty, believing, somehow, that she deserved it. Dr. Clara Hayes listened to everything with professional but understanding attention. She explained to Marina that nothing that had happened was her fault, that domestic violence follows predictable patterns, cycles of tension, explosion, and honeymoon, that Richard was solely responsible for his actions, that Marina was a survivor, not a passive victim. While Marina began her journey of emotional healing, Henry accelerated his legal offensive. The National Crime Agency opened a formal investigation into Richard's financial movements. His assets were preventively frozen, his investment company was under audit, and the trial for the assault was approaching, scheduled for 3 months later. The following months were a period of profound transformation for Marina. Her belly grew, and with it a strength she didn't know she possessed. The sessions with Dr. Clara Hayes continued, and slowly Marina began to understand that her story didn't end as a victim, but restarted as a survivor. There were difficult days when the trauma returned in vivid nightmares, but there were also days when she could genuinely smile as she felt the baby kick. Media coverage of the case was intense. Richard tried to control the narrative through his lawyers, claiming that everything had been a misunderstanding, that he was under the influence of medication he shouldn't have mixed with alcohol, that he loved Marina deeply and regretted it. His public statements were calculated to generate sympathy, but hit a snag. The videos didn't lie. Henry, along with Jonathan, decided it was time to change strategy. It wasn't enough to just criminally prosecute Richard. It was necessary to show the country who he really was, to completely unmask the facade of the respectable businessman. For this, they needed Marina to agree to expose herself publicly, something she was still reluctant to. Turkeys. It was during a sunset conversation on the veranda of the Hampstead house that Henry delicately broached the subject. Marina was almost 8 months pregnant, wearing a light dress that accommodated her pronounced belly. Henry brought chamomile tea and sat beside her in silence for a few minutes before speaking. He explained that her voice could make a difference for other women, that her public testimony would not just be against Richard, but an act of courage that could inspire others trapped in abusive relationships to seek help. Marina listened, tears silently streaming down her face. She was scared. Very scared, afraid of being judged, of having her pain turned into entertainment, of not being strong enough. But then she thought of the baby she carried. She thought of the world in which this child would grow up. She thought of all the women silenced by fear and shame. And she decided that her silence had protected no one, much less herself. If her story could light a lamp for someone lost in darkness, it was worth facing the discomfort. Henry's communication team prepared everything carefully. It would not be a sensationalist interview, but a recorded statement by Marina, in her own words. She chose to record in the living room of the house where she now lived, a welcoming environment with soft, natural light. She wore the same light blue shade she had worn on the night of the assault, a deliberate and symbolic choice. When the cameras started rolling, Marina took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice came out firm. She told her story without unnecessary dramatization, just the naked truth. She spoke about how the abuse began, how it intensified, how she felt trapped. She spoke about that terrible night at the Savoy Hotel, and then she looked directly into the camera and said something that would echo across the country. I know there are women watching this now who are living what I lived, women who think they deserve the violence, who believe the excuses, who are afraid to leave. I want you to know that silence protects no one. It only strengthens the abuser. And you are not alone. I was not alone, even when I thought I was. And neither are you. Marina also revealed for the first time publicly that she was pregnant on the night of the assault, a detail that had been kept secret until then. She discreetly showed the scars that still marked her arms. There was no dramatization, just the raw, undeniable truth. The video aired during prime time on one of the television channels belonging to Henry's group. The audience broke records. Social media exploded. Hashtags of support for Marina dominated trending topics. Thousands of women began to share their own stories of abuse. The video went viral internationally, being translated into several languages. The public reaction was overwhelming. Protests were organized in front of Richard's company offices, demanding justice for Marina. Investors who still maintained relations with him began to break contracts. His image as a respectable businessman was completely destroyed. Now, he was just the man who had assaulted his pregnant wife and tried to play the victim. Richard watched the video alone in his office. His lawyers had advised against it, but he needed to see it. When Marina spoke directly to the camera, when she showed the scars, something in him broke. It wasn't genuine remorse, but the clear realization that he had completely lost control of the narrative. Everything he had built was crumbling. Julia, the ex-mistress, also watched the video. She cried. She felt heavy guilt for having been complicit, even indirectly, in that suffering. She then decided she needed to do more. In addition to the documents she had already provided, she had recorded conversations with Richard where he admitted to using Marina's forged signatures. These were recordings she had made to protect herself, in case he tried to blame her for something. She handed everything over to the federal investigators. With this new material, the investigation gained even greater momentum. HM Revenue and Customs, HMRC, joined the case, tracing the international financial movements. They discovered that Richard had diverted over £50 million through shell companies, using forged documents with Marina's signature. It was a complex scheme that had been operating for at least 3 years. The net was closing in. Richard was isolated. His former partners publicly avoided him. Exclusive clubs revoked his membership. Invitations to charity events were cancelled. He was a social pariah, exactly the opposite of what he had always wanted to be. His obsession had always been prestige, recognition, the power that came from others' admiration. Now there was only contempt. Marina, on the other hand, experienced something unexpected: liberation. By exposing her story, by refusing to carry the shame that was never hers to begin with, she found a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Messages of support arrived by the thousands. Women recounted how her testimony had encouraged them to report abusers, to seek help, to leave toxic relationships. It was in this context that Marina gave birth. A healthy baby girl with big, curious eyes, who was born crying loudly as if announcing her arrival to the world with determination. Marina held her in her arms and immediately knew what she would name her: Hope, because that was exactly what that little one represented: the hope of a better future, of a new beginning, of a life free from fear. Henry met his granddaughter a few hours after birth. He held little Hope with a tenderness that moved the nurses present. He looked at Marina and saw in her a strength that had always been there, merely dormant due to violence and control. His daughter was a warrior, and now she had an even greater reason to fight. 2 weeks after Hope's birth, the news Jonathan had eagerly awaited arrived. The Crown Prosecution Service formally charged Richard Thorne with fraud, document forgery, money laundering, and other financial crimes. Along with the criminal proceedings for assault, Richard now faced the possibility of decades of imprisonment. The trial date was set. It would be a public process, broadcast live, such was the national interest. Marina knew she would have to testify. The idea still scared her, but now she had something she didn't have before: purpose. She would speak not only for herself, but for all silenced women. In the days leading up to the trial, Marina received hundreds of letters of support. Women from all over the UK sent words of encouragement, shared their own stories, and thanked her for finding the courage to speak. One particular letter deeply touched Marina. It was from a 16-year-old girl who recounted how Marina's testimony had helped her report the stepfather who abused her. The girl now lived with her grandmother safely, rebuilding her life. Marina kept that letter close to her heart. It was confirmation that she had made the right choice. Her pain would not be wasted. It would be transformed into something greater, into real change, into protection for other people. The courtroom awaited her, but she would not go as a cornered victim. She would go as a survivor determined to ensure that justice was done. Richard, meanwhile, watched his world completely collapse. His assets were frozen. He lived in a rented apartment, much smaller than the luxurious penthouse he once inhabited. His lawyers were paid by an emergency fund that had not yet been blocked, but even that was running out. He tried to contact Marina diversely through intermediaries, but all attempts were blocked. Henry had built an insurmountable wall around his daughter. The eve of the trial was a period of intense preparation. Jonathan went over all the points that needed to be addressed with Marina. She practiced her testimony, controlled her breathing, sought inner strength. Dr. Clara Hayes spent the afternoon with her, working on emotional anchoring techniques for the moment she would have to face Richard again in court. That night, Marina looked at Hope sleeping peacefully in her crib. The little one knew nothing about the storm that had preceded her birth. She would grow up knowing only the strong version of her mother, the woman who refused to remain broken. Marina gently kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered a promise that tomorrow would be the beginning of the end of that nightmare. The Royal Courts of Justice had never seen such a commotion. From early morning, journalists from all over the country strategically positioned themselves to capture every moment of what was already being called the trial of the century. Protesters filled the steps, some demanding justice for Marina, others holding signs with personal stories of domestic violence. It was as if that trial represented much more than the individual case of one woman. It was a moment of collective reckoning. Marina arrived at the courthouse at 8 in the morning, accompanied by Henry and a discreet security team. She wore a light blue suit, the color that had become her symbolic mark of resistance. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, no excessive makeup, just herself. When she stepped out of the car, the cameras flashed. She held her head high, her shoulders straight. She was no longer the woman who had fallen on the marble floor of that ballroom months ago. Jonathan Reed waited at the entrance, mentally reviewing every detail of the strategy he had meticulously prepared. He had 30 years of experience in law, but he had never taken a case that affected his emotions so much. Seeing Marina rebuild herself over those months had been inspiring. Now it was up to him to ensure that this reconstruction culminated in real justice. Richard arrived 15 minutes later, through a side entrance. He was thin, with deep dark circles under his eyes. The suit he wore was expensive, but it seemed too big on his body, which had lost weight. He avoided the cameras, his eyes fixed on the ground. His lawyer, Dr. Maurice Lawson, a criminal defense attorney known for defending impossible cases, tried to exude confidence, but even he seemed skeptical about the chances of success. The courtroom was spacious, with dark wooden benches and solemn lighting. Judge Charles Edwards, an experienced 62-year-old magistrate known for his impartiality and rigor, presided over the session. He observed the crowded room and called for order. The silence was immediate, heavy with expectation. Prosecutor Augustus Perry began his argument with surgical precision. He presented the videos from the night at the Savoy Hotel. Even having seen those images dozens of times during the investigation, the entire room shuddered watching again. The sound of the whip cutting, the air, Marina's screams, the brutal violence against a pregnant woman. It was impossible to watch without feeling the visceral impact of that cruelty. Next, the videos obtained by Connie were presented. Months of documented abuse, a clear progression of violence that culminated in that public night. Richard's lawyer tried to contest the validity of the recordings, claiming they were made without consent, but the judge allowed their exhibition, considering the seriousness of the accusations and the fact that they documented situations that occurred in common areas of the residence. Witnesses began to be called. Guests from the charity event recounted what they saw. Beatrice Finch, her voice trembling but firm, described the terror of those moments. The quartet's conductor told how he had to drop his violin to help restrain Richard. Each testimony added more weight to the accusation. The doctors who treated Marina at the hospital presented detailed reports. They described the injuries, the severity of the physical traumas, the risk she and the baby had run. One of the obstetricians became emotional, recalling the first ultrasound performed in the emergency room, when everyone held their breath waiting to confirm that the fetus was still alive. Then came the most anticipated moment. Marina was called to testify. She stood calmly, adjusted her blazer, and walked to the witness chair. She was a few feet from Richard for the first time since that night. He looked at her briefly but quickly lowered his eyes, unable to sustain her steady gaze. The prosecutor conducted the interrogation with sensitivity. Marina answered each question in a clear voice. She spoke about the relationship from the beginning, about how Richard had changed after the wedding. She described the pattern of control and isolation. She spoke about previous aggressions, always followed by apologies and promises of change that never materialized. When she came to the account of that specific night, her voice faltered for only a second. Henry, sitting in the front row, felt his chest tighten. But Marina quickly regained her composure. She described every detail. The accident with the juice, the change in Richard's eyes, the fear she felt, the blows, the pain, the desperation to protect her unborn baby. Richard's lawyer tried to discredit her testimony during cross-examination. He suggested that Marina exaggerated, that she had deliberately provoked Richard, that the marriage had problems on both sides. But every attempt ran up against the irrefutable evidence of the videos. There was no denying what dozens of people saw and what the cameras captured. Julia was called next. Her testimony brought a new dimension to the case. She confirmed the extramarital affair and, more importantly, testified about the financial documents. She presented conversations in which Richard admitted to using Marina's forged signatures. She described how he boasted about moving money without his wife's knowledge, treating her as a decorative object without autonomy. Financial experts from the National Crime Agency presented analyses of the offshore accounts. They demonstrated through spreadsheets and documents how Richard had structured a complex scheme of resource diversion. £53 million had been illegally transferred using forged documents with Marina's signature. It was fraud on an industrial scale. Richard's lawyer tried to argue that his client suffered from undiagnosed psychiatric disorders, that alcohol consumption on the night of the event had exacerbated a pre-existing condition. He brought in a psychiatrist who had never personally examined Richard, only analyzed reports, to try to build an argument of diminished capacity. The prosecutor easily dismantled this strategy. If Richard suffered from such a severe disorder, he asked, how could he manage a multi-million-pound company? How did he sign complex contracts? How did he participate in high-level meetings? Was mental illness convenient only when it served as an excuse for violence? Connie also testified, recounting the 2 years she worked in the couple's home. She described the constant climate of tension, how Marina tiptoed around not to provoke Richard's anger. She spoke about the times she found broken objects, bloodstains she had to clean, the sound of arguments that kept her awake at night. The trial extended for 3 intense days. Each session revealed new layers of Richard's systematic cruelty. It was not just an act of impulsive violence, but a pattern of calculated abuse, a sick need for total control over Marina. On the 3rd day, the time came for closing arguments. Prosecutor Augustus Perry delivered a speech that would be quoted in law schools for years to come. He spoke about the illusion of domestic violence as a private matter. He argued that assaults against women were crimes against all society, a breach of the basic social contract of respect and human dignity. He pointed to Marina and said that there was living proof that it was possible to survive and transcend trauma, but this did not diminish the gravity of what Richard had done. Every blow struck that night was not just against Marina, but against the idea that women had a right to safety, autonomy, and respect. And the financial fraud showed that Richard saw Marina not as a partner, but as property to be used as convenient. Richard's lawyer made his defense emphasizing his client's remorse, claiming that he was fundamentally a good person who had made a terrible mistake in a moment of weakness. He asked for clemency, arguing that Richard had already lost everything: his reputation, his businesses, his family. Would that not be enough? When both sides finished, Judge Charles Edwards announced that the verdict would be read the next day. The room slowly emptied, each person processing the weight of what they had witnessed. Marina left surrounded by the security team, but before getting into the car she turned to the crowd of supporters. She waved briefly, a simple gesture that was met with applause and shouts of encouragement. That night, Marina barely slept. It wasn't anxiety about the verdict. She was sure that justice would be done. It was something deeper, the feeling of definitively closing a chapter. In the morning, while feeding hope, she looked out the window and saw the sun rising over London. It was a new day, literally and metaphorically. Everyone returned to the courthouse. The silence was absolute when the judge began to read his sentence. He methodically reviewed all the evidence presented. He analyzed each testimony. He cited legal precedents. And then, in a firm and clear voice, he declared Richard Thorne guilty of all charges: aggravated assault, attempted harm to a pregnant woman, fraud, document forgery, and money laundering. The total sentence amounted to 23 years of imprisonment in an initially closed regime. The gavel struck the bench with a sound that echoed through the room. Marina closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Beside her, Henry held her hand. It was the justice they sought, but it didn't bring the explosive joy that some people imagined. It brought something more subtle and profound, the feeling that the world, at least in that moment, had worked as it should. Actions had consequences. Violence did not go unpunished. Richard was immediately handcuffed. As he was led out of the room, he looked at Marina one last time. She stared back, without anger, without fear, only with a serenity he could never understand. It was the gaze of someone who had survived the worst he could do and would emerge stronger on the other side. The months following the sentence brought a peace that Marina hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the absence of challenges, but the freedom to face them without constant fear. Hope grew healthy and curious, crawling around the Hampstead house, filling the rooms with childish laughter that healed invisible wounds. Henry spent entire afternoons playing with his granddaughter, rediscovering a lightness that business had long stolen from him. Marina began to think about the future concretely. Throughout her recovery, between sessions with Dr. Clara Hayes and nights caring for Hope, an idea took shape in her mind. She had received thousands of messages from women in situations similar to hers. Many asked for help, didn't know where to go, were afraid to report, had no resources to start over. Marina saw in these messages not only pain, but also an opportunity to transform her suffering into something greater. It was during a breakfast with Henry that she presented her proposal. She wanted to create a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of domestic violence. Not just a temporary shelter, but a complete program that offered psychological support, legal guidance, professional training, and assistance so that women could rebuild their lives with dignity and autonomy. Henry listened in silence, observing the sparkle in his daughter's eyes as she described her vision. When Marina finished, he simply said that he would provide all the necessary financial and structural support. More than that, he would make his company's communication team available to promote the initiative. If Marina was transforming her pain into purpose, he would do everything in his power to amplify that purpose. The Hope Foundation was officially created 4 months after the trial. The name was no coincidence. It was a tribute to Marina's daughter and what she represented. The possibility of a new beginning, of a future, of life after trauma. The chosen building was in South London, a spacious area that was renovated to include comfortable rooms, consulting rooms for psychological support, classrooms for professional courses, and a welcoming communal space. The team was carefully selected: psychologists specializing in trauma, lawyers with experience in family law and domestic violence cases, dedicated social workers, teachers for the training courses. Marina insisted on actively participating in each hiring, wanting to ensure that everyone shared the philosophy of empowerment and not just welfare. Dr. Clara Hayes accepted the invitation to coordinate the psychology department. During Marina's months of treatment, she had developed not only a professional relationship, but a deep respect for her patient's strength and determination. Seeing Marina transform her own healing into an instrument to heal others was the realization of everything Clarice believed about human resilience. The Foundation's inauguration was scheduled for a symbolic date, exactly 1 year after that night at the Savoy Hotel. Marina insisted on this, not to celebrate the violence, but to mark the complete transformation of that pain into something constructive. The event would be held at the hotel itself, in the same ballroom where everything had happened. It was a bold choice that many questioned, but Marina was determined. When the inauguration day arrived, the ballroom was unrecognizable. Where before there had been blood and trauma, now there were light blue flowers everywhere, soft music and hopeful faces of people who came to support the cause. Politicians, businessmen, artists, all attended. But what moved Marina most were the ordinary women, survivors of domestic violence who traveled from different regions just to be there, to see with their own eyes that transformation was possible. Marina took the stage wearing the same shade of blue that had become her trademark. Hope, now 1 year and 2 months old, was in Henry's arms in the front row. When Marina began to speak, her voice filled the ballroom with a quiet authority that came from someone who had survived hell and chosen not only to escape, but to help others do the same. Exactly 1 year ago, she said, in this very place I lived the worst day of my life. But today I return here not as a victim, but as a survivor determined to transform trauma into hope. This foundation is not about me. It is about every woman who is still trapped in the cycle of violence, who believes there is no way out, who carries shame that is not hers. It is to tell them that there is a way, there is support, there is a future. She spoke about the services the foundation would offer. She explained that no woman would be turned away for lack of resources, that all services would be free, that the doors would always be open. She announced partnerships with companies that would preferentially offer job vacancies to women who completed the training courses. But the most impactful moment came when Marina invited 3 women to the stage whom she had met during her own healing journey. All were survivors of domestic violence. One of them, Patricia, had been the first beneficiary of the Foundation's services during the pilot phase. She told her story briefly but powerfully, describing how the support she received had helped her not only to leave an abusive relationship, but to completely rebuild her self-esteem and independence. Tears flowed freely through the ballroom. They were not tears just of sadness, but of recognition, of connection, of hope. Many of the women present saw their own stories reflected in those testimonies, and they also saw that the ending did not have to be a tragedy. It could be a new beginning. Henry observed everything with a pride that transcended words. His daughter, whom he had seen broken and bloodied on that same marble floor, now stood there radiant, transforming poison into medicine. He thought of all the decisions he had made throughout his life, all the deals closed, all the professional achievements, none compared to the importance of what Marina was building at that moment. After the official event, Marina decided to do something no one expected. She asked everyone to leave the ballroom for a few minutes. She wanted to be alone there. Henry hesitated, worried, but she reassured him with a look. Some witnesses needed to be faced alone. When the ballroom was empty and silent, Marina walked slowly to the exact spot where she had fallen that night. She knelt on the cold marble. Floor placed her hand on the smooth surface. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel everything again, the pain, the fear, the despair. But now, with the distance of time and healing, she could see that past Marina with compassion. She took a small bouquet of light blue flowers from her purse. She carefully placed them on the floor, as if at a memorial. In a way, it was. It was the memorial of the woman she had been, who needed to definitively say goodbye to that identity of victim to fully embrace the new life she had built. In a low voice, almost a whisper, Marina spoke to the empty space. "I forgive you," she said, "not because you deserve forgiveness, not because what you did was acceptable, but because I deserve peace. I deserve to live without carrying the weight of hatred. My daughter deserves to grow up without seeing resentment in my eyes, so I forgive you, Richard, and in doing so, I completely free myself." The tears came, but they were different from the tears of the past. They were tears of liberation, of closure, of a chapter definitively ended. Marina stayed there for a few minutes, allowing herself to fully process that moment. When she finally stood up, she felt literally lighter, as if an invisible weight had been removed from her shoulders. When she left the ballroom, she found Henry waiting outside, Hope still in his arms. The little one stretched her arms out to her mother, and Marina picked her up, hugging her tightly. This is the part that matters now, she thought. This child, this future, this opportunity to make a difference in other people's lives. The following months were of intense growth for the foundation. The first group of women welcomed consisted of 20 people. All received individual and group psychological support, legal guidance for separation processes and protective measures, and began training courses in diverse areas such as IT, beauty, cooking, and crafts. Marina visited the foundation weekly, but made a point of not assuming a savior role. She wanted the women to understand that the strength for transformation came from themselves, that she was merely facilitating a process that each one needed to lead. She talked with the residents, listened to their stories, shared hers when appropriate, but always emphasizing that each journey was unique. One of the stories that touched Marina most was that of Camilla, a 24-year-old who arrived at the foundation with her 3-year-old son. She had suffered abuse from her partner for 5 years, since she was 19. She had no family to turn to, no professional training, and was completely isolated. When she saw Marina's video on television, something inside her awakened. If a woman from high society could speak about the violence she suffered, perhaps she too could ask for help. Camilla flourished at the foundation. She discovered a talent for cooking and enrolled in the gastronomy course offered. Her self-esteem, completely destroyed by years of abuse, began to rebuild day by day. 6 months after arriving, she got a job in an artisan bakery and was able to rent a small apartment for herself and her son. When she came to say goodbye to Marina, she hugged her, crying, and said that Marina had saved her life. Marina gently corrected her. "You saved yourself. I just showed that it was possible." The foundation quickly gained national recognition. Other similar organizations from different regions sought Marina for consultation, wanting to replicate the model. She generously shared all the knowledge acquired, believing that the more places offered this type of support, the more women would be helped. 1 year after its inauguration, the Hope Foundation had already welcomed 120 women with an impressive success rate. 80% of them managed to rebuild their lives independently, with stable jobs, and without returning to abusive relationships. Marina knew that the numbers were important to secure more investments and support, but what truly mattered were the individual stories, each woman who regained her dignity and autonomy. 3 years had passed since that night that changed everything. The Hope Foundation was now a national reference in welcoming and recovering victims of domestic violence. The original building needed to be expanded, and Henry financed the purchase of the neighboring property, doubling the service capacity. Marina dedicated a good part of her days to working at the foundation, balancing this with the motherhood she had embraced with intensity and love. Hope was 4 years old, a clever and affectionate girl who loved to draw and tell stories. She grew up surrounded by love, never knowing the violence that preceded her birth. Marina had decided she would tell the story when her daughter was older, but for now she just wanted her to live in the lightness of protected childhood. Marina's routine included lectures at schools, universities, and corporate events. She had become an active voice in the discussion about domestic violence, always bringing not only her personal story but data, practical solutions, and especially hope. Her message was clear. It was possible to leave, it was possible to rebuild, it was possible to be happy again. Henry, in turn, had used all his influence in the business world to create a support network for the foundation. He managed to get several companies to commit to, preferentially hiring women who completed the training programs. He created a permanent fund that guaranteed the financial sustainability of the foundation independently of one-off donations. His greatest achievement, however, was not in the numbers. It was in seeing his daughter reborn, strong and radiant. It was during the preparation for the Foundation's annual gala that Marina received unexpected news. Richard had requested a meeting with her through his lawyers. He had been serving his sentence for over 3 years with good conduct, but still had many years ahead. He wasn't asking for early release or favors. He just wanted to speak with Marina if she accepted. Marina's first reaction was to refuse immediately. Why relive that? Why give him space in her life again, even if only for a conversation? But then she talked with Dr. Clara Hayes, who continued to be her therapist and friend. Clarice advised neither against nor in favor, but helped Marina explore her feelings about the request. After days of deep reflection, Marina decided to accept, not for him, but for herself. She wanted to look into the eyes of the man who had tried to destroy her and show him exactly what she had become despite him. She wanted him to see that she had not only survived, but prospered in ways he had never imagined possible. It was closure, a final piece of her healing puzzle. The visit was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Marina was accompanied only by Jonathan Reed, who insisted on being present as legal and emotional protection. The prison environment was arid, grey walls, and the characteristic smell of a place where time passed too slowly. She signed the necessary registers and was led to a private visiting room. Richard entered a few minutes later, escorted by a guard. Marina barely recognized him. The arrogant and imposing man she had known was now a diminished figure. His hair was grey and thinning, his face marked by deep lines of age and regret. He seemed to have aged 15 years in 3. When he saw her, his eyes immediately filled with tears. They remained silent for a long moment. It was Richard who finally spoke, his voice hoarse and hesitant. He didn't try to justify himself or make excuses. He simply said that he spent every day of the last 3 years reliving that night, that he saw her face. Every time he closed his eyes, that shame and remorse were constant companions. Marina listened without interrupting him. When he finished, she took a deep breath and began to speak. She said that she had not come there to hear him lament or to offer forgiveness that would absolve him. She had already forgiven him, but that forgiveness was a gift to herself, not to him. She came so that he could see with his own eyes what she had built from the ashes he had created. She spoke about the Hope Foundation, about the hundreds of women who had already been helped, about how she had transformed the deepest pain into meaningful purpose. She spoke about Hope, the daughter he had tried to hurt even before she was born, who was now a healthy and happy child. She said that her life was full, meaningful, free, and that he had no place in it, neither in hatred nor in paralyzing forgiveness. Richard listened with his head bowed, tears silently streaming down. When Marina finished, he simply nodded. There was nothing he could say. No words could undo what he had done. He asked only one thing, that if one day very far in the future, Hope wanted to meet him, Marina would consider allowing it. Not to build a relationship, but just so the girl could have answers if she ever sought them. Marina promised nothing. She said it would depend entirely on Hope when she reached the age to make that choice. For now she was just a happy child who didn't need to carry the burden of knowing the circumstances of her birth. With that, Marina stood up. The meeting was over. She looked at Richard one last time, not with anger or pity, but with a neutrality that was perhaps the greatest evidence of her complete healing. He no longer had power over her emotions. When she left the prison, Marina breathed the fresh air deeply. Jonathan asked if she was okay. She smiled and said yes, that she was finally, completely fine. That visit had closed a circle. There was nothing pending, no unspoken conversation, no unresolved confrontation. She was free in every possible way. The Foundation's annual gala took place the following week, and it was the biggest yet. The ballroom of a 5-star hotel was packed with over 500 people, businessmen, artists, politicians, activists, all united by the cause of combating domestic violence and supporting survivors. Marina arrived radiant, wearing a light blue dress embroidered with delicate floral patterns. Hope accompanied her, wearing a miniature version of her mother's dress. During the event, several women who had passed through the Foundation took the stage to share their stories of transformation. Each testimony was a testament to the power of human resilience and the importance of adequate support systems. They were no longer victims defined by the violence they suffered, but survivors who chose to rebuild their lives with courage and determination. When Marina took the stage for her annual speech, the ovation was immediate and prolonged. She waited for silence to return and began to speak, her firm voice echoing through the ballroom. She spoke about the Foundation's progress in the last year, about plans to expand to other cities, about partnerships that were being established. But then she changed her tone. She said she wanted to talk about something they rarely discussed openly: forgiveness. Not imposed forgiveness, the kind society expects from women as a sign of moral strength, but genuine forgiveness, the kind that comes from a place of deep healing and serves only one's own inner peace. She explained that forgiving did not mean forgetting or allowing abuse to be minimized. It meant freeing oneself from the emotional prison that resentment creates. "I forgave my abuser," Marina said, "but not for him, for me. Because carrying hatred is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. I chose to be free, completely free. And that freedom didn't come easy. It came through a lot of internal work, many therapy sessions, many nights crying, many days actively choosing to move forward. But it came. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Many people had tears in their eyes. Marina continued, speaking about how society needs to change its approach to domestic violence, about the importance of believing victims, of providing adequate resources, of holding abusers accountable without allowing them to manipulate the system. Then she made an announcement that surprised everyone. The Hope Foundation was launching a pilot program also aimed at men, not abusers, but men interested in deconstructing toxic patterns of masculinity, in learning about healthy relationships, in breaking cycles of violence before they started. It would be preventive, educational, focused on the next generation. Henry, sitting in the front row, smiled with pride. That was his daughter, always thinking ahead, always seeking systemic solutions and not just palliative ones. Hope was on his lap, already sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the impact her mother's words were having on that audience. The event ended late at night. When they finally were alone in the car returning home, Marina looked at Hope sleeping in her car seat and at Henry driving calmly. She felt deep gratitude for everything they had, for the safety, for the love, for the opportunity to make a difference. They arrived home and Marina carried Hope to her room, gently placing her in bed. The girl murmured something unintelligible but didn't wake up. Marina stayed there for a few minutes, just watching her daughter sleep, amazed by the preserved innocence of that child who had been born amid so much turbulence. The next morning, Marina woke up early. It was Saturday, a day she always reserved to be completely present with Hope. She made pancakes, the girl's favorite, and when she woke up, they had breakfast together on the veranda, watching the sun gradually illuminate the city of London spread out below them. After breakfast, Marina had a sudden idea. She told Hope she wanted to show her a special place. They took a taxi to the headquarters of the Hope Foundation. It was Saturday, and the building was quiet, with only the security team present. Marina had keys and entered with her daughter by the hand. She showed Hope each room, explaining in simple language what happened there. "This is where we help people who are sad to become happy again." Hope listened attentively, asking questions with the typical curiosity of a 4-year-old. When they reached the main auditorium, Marina went onto the stage with Hope. From there, they looked at the empty chairs. "One day," Marina said, kneeling to be at her daughter's height, "when you are older, I will tell you a story about a woman who went through very difficult things but found the strength to start over. And you will understand that your name, Hope, represents all of that. It represents that there is always a possibility of better days, even when everything seems dark." Hope hugged her mother and said that she already thought her name was beautiful, that when she grew up she wanted to help sad people too. Marina felt her heart swell with emotion. She was raising an empathetic, conscious, strong child. She was breaking cycles and creating new legacies. That afternoon, back home, Marina went up to the building's rooftop, where they lived with Henry. Hope was playing nearby under her grandfather's watchful eye. Marina approached the safe edge, looking at the horizon where the sky met the sea in shades of blue. The wind gently stirred her hair. She thought about the entire journey she had traveled, from the frightened and broken woman on the marble floor to the strong and accomplished person she was now. It was not a magical or quick transformation. It was built day by day, choice by choice, step by step. There were relapses, moments of doubt, days when everything seemed impossible. But she persisted. Hope ran up and hugged Marina's legs. The mother picked up her daughter and whispered in her ear, "Now we are free, my love. Completely free." And she pointed to the horizon, watching the sun begin to set, painting the sky with every possible shade of blue, orange, and pink. Marina knew her story was just one among millions. She knew that at that exact moment, women across the country, across the world, were living what she had lived. Some still trapped in the cycle of violence, others beginning to find the strength to leave, others already on the path to recovery. Her story, told publicly, had become bigger than herself. It had become a symbol, an inspiration, proof that survival was not only possible but could be transformative. As the sun disappeared on the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the sky, Marina made a silent promise. She would continue fighting, not just for herself, but for all women who still needed to find their voice. The Hope Foundation was just the beginning. There was so much more to do, so many lives to impact, so many stories waiting for happy endings. Henry joined them at the railing, the three forming a small family constellation against the darkening sky. There was no need for words. They had crossed hell and emerged on the other side, not just intact, but transformed. Stronger, more compassionate, more determined to make a difference in the world. Marina looked one last time at the horizon, at the tomorrow that promised to be, full of possibilities. Her story, marked by the deepest pain, ended as a legacy of rebirth, not only for her but for all who, inspired by her voice, decided that silence ended with them. Dawn would come again, as it always does, bringing with it the promise of better days, of continuous healing, of freedom conquered and preserved. Dear listeners, we hope Marina and Hope's story has touched your hearts and shown that even from the most difficult situations, a transformative strength can emerge. Marina taught us that forgiveness is not weakness but liberation, and that our pain can become a purpose to help others. If this narrative moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because every day we bring stories that explore the complexity of human life, resilience, and the capacity for new beginnings. We have a special playlist with other inspiring stories waiting for you. Click here on the side to continue this journey with us, and tell us in the comments what part of the story touched you the most. Your words inspire not only us, but our entire community of listeners. Thank you for being here, and remember, just as Marina discovered, you too have a strength within you greater than you imagine. Until the next story.